When you begin to loosen your grip on the expectation of genuine emotional empathy, something subtle but profound happens inside you. Much of the suffering in relationships with a narcissistic woman does not come from what she does, but from what you keep hoping she will one day become. You wait for her to truly feel your pain, to resonate with your inner world, to respond not with strategy or image management, but with authentic emotional presence. Yet psychologically speaking, this expectation misunderstands her inner structure. From a depth psychology perspective, what you are encountering is not cruelty in the ordinary sense, but a deficit. As Carl Jung observed, when the ego is overinflated, the capacity for genuine relatedness diminishes. Empathy requires the ability to momentarily step out of oneself, to risk vulnerability by entering another's psychic reality. For the narcissistic personality, this feels dangerous. Instead of empathy, you receive imitation, words that sound right, gestures that appear caring, but lack emotional weight. It looks like understanding, yet it does not land where you need it to. If you continue to expect emotional attunement from someone who cannot sustain it, you will repeatedly interpret absence as rejection and confusion as cruelty. This slowly erodes your self-worth. But when you stop expecting empathy, you stop personalizing the emptiness. You realize the silence is not a verdict on your value. It is a reflection of her limitations. This shift is not about becoming cold or cynical. It is about becoming accurate. Accuracy is a form of compassion toward yourself. When you no longer seek emotional nourishment from a barren source, you begin to cultivate it elsewhere within yourself and with people capable of mutual presence. And in that moment of clarity, you reclaim something essential, the freedom to stop begging for depth and the strength to choose environments where your humanity is truly met. Another expectation that quietly drains your peace is the hope that she will one day take responsibility and truly reflect on her own behavior. Many people remain psychologically bound not by love, but by the belief that clarity is coming. That one honest conversation will finally lead to insight, remorse, or change. Yet this expectation misunderstands the defensive architecture of narcissism. From a psychological standpoint, accountability requires the ego to tolerate shame. It requires the ability to look inward and say, I may be wrong, without collapsing. As Carl Jung made clear, when the ego is rigidly defended, self-reflection feels like annihilation. For the narcissistic woman, admitting fault threatens the carefully constructed image that keeps her inner chaos at bay. So instead of reflection, you encounter deflection. Instead of accountability, you receive blame shifting, minimization, or a rewritten version of events where she is always the victim. If you continue to expect responsibility, you will find yourself stuck in endless explanations over justifying your feelings, collecting evidence, and replaying conversations in your mind. This is not resolution. It is psychological exhaustion. You begin to doubt your perception, not because it is wrong, but because it is never acknowledged. Over time, this erodes your trust in yourself more than in her. Letting go of this expectation is not surrender. It is liberation. When you stop waiting for her to see herself clearly, you stop placing your emotional stability in the hands of someone invested in blindness. You recognize that insight cannot be forced and maturity cannot be negotiated. At that point, something shifts. You stop arguing with reality and start responding to it. You reclaim your clarity, your energy, and your authority over your own inner life. And that is the moment you realize peace does not come from being understood by someone unwilling to look inward. It comes from understanding yourself well enough to walk away from the illusion. One of the most destabilizing expectations to release is the belief that love, once declared, will remain consistent. With a narcissistic woman, affection often feels intense, even intoxicating, but it is rarely stable. It rises and falls according to admiration, control, or emotional utility, not according to mutual bond. When you expect consistency in this environment, you unknowingly place your nervous system in a state of permanent alert, always scanning for the next shift in temperature. From a psychological perspective, love requires continuity of self. It requires an inner core capable of holding affection steady, even when emotions fluctuate. As Carl Jung understood, when the personality is fragmented, relationships become instruments of regulation rather than spaces of connection. What feels like love is often a response to how well you are serving a role in her inner drama. When you comply, warmth appears. When you assert yourself, it vanishes. This is not intimacy, it is conditional attachment. If you continue expecting emotional stability, you will interpret inconsistency as something you must fix. You will try to be better, quieter, more understanding, less demanding. Over time, you begin to contort yourself to preserve moments of closeness, but the price is high. You lose your grounding, your spontaneity, and eventually your sense of self. When you stop expecting consistent love, something paradoxical happens. You stop chasing emotional weather, and you begin anchoring yourself internally. You recognize that unpredictability is not passion, and anxiety is not desire. Stability, in fact, is not boring. It is regulating. It allows the psyche to rest. Realization restores your autonomy. You stop waiting for affection to return and start choosing environments where presence is reliable, not negotiated. And in doing so, you discover a deeper truth. Love that requires you to disappear in order to be maintained is not love at all. It is a transaction, and you were never meant to pay with your peace. Another expectation that quietly fractures your inner stability is the hope that she will one day truly see you. Many remain emotionally invested, not because they are fulfilled, but because they are waiting to be recognized, to be understood beyond their usefulness, beyond the role they play. You reveal your thoughts, your struggles, your values, believing that intimacy naturally leads to being known. Yet with a narcissistic woman, this expectation often meets an invisible wall. Psychologically, being seen requires curiosity about the other as a separate reality. It demands the capacity to tolerate difference without turning it into a threat. As Carl Jung observed, when the ego dominates the psyche, other people are experienced less as individuals and more as extensions of the self. In this dynamic, you are not encountered as who you are, but as how you reflect her image, validate her worth, or stabilize her inner tension. Your inner world becomes secondary to the function you serve. If you continue to expect genuine recognition, you will slowly over-explain yourself. You will try to clarify, soften, or reshape your truth in hopes of finally being understood. This is exhausting, and more importantly, it is diminishing. You begin to feel strangely invisible, even while being constantly engaged. The tragedy is not that you are unknown, but that you are known only superficially. Letting go of this expectation does not mean withdrawing into isolation. It means redirecting your need for recognition towards spaces where it can be met. When you stop seeking visibility from someone who cannot offer it, you reclaim your authenticity. You stop performing and start existing. And here is the quiet liberation in that shift. When you no longer need to be seen by someone incapable of seeing, you free yourself to stand fully in your own reality. And from that place, you naturally gravitate toward those who recognize you without requiring you to disappear. One of the most draining expectations to release is the belief that conflict will be fair. Many people enter arguments assuming that truth, sincerity, and emotional honesty will naturally guide the outcome. They believe that if they explain themselves clearly enough, if they remain calm enough, the conversation will eventually reach understanding. But in a relationship with a narcissistic woman, conflict does not operate on the axis of resolution. It operates on the axis of control. Psychologically, healthy disagreement requires a shared reality. It assumes that both parties value truth over victory. As Carl Jung recognized, when the ego is threatened, it will distort reality to preserve its dominance. In this state, conflict becomes a theater, not a dialogue. Facts are reshaped, emotions are weaponized, and your words are reframed not to be understood, but to be used. You are not conversing. You are being maneuvered. If you continue to expect fairness, you will keep entering debates already defeated. You will bring logic to an emotional power struggle and wonder why clarity never arrives. Over time, this creates a subtle self-betrayal. You begin questioning your memory, your tone, even your intentions, not because you are wrong, but because the rules keep changing. This is how psychological exhaustion sets in. When you release the expectation of fairness, you reclaim something vital, discernment. You stop trying to win conversations and start observing patterns. You recognize when engagement leads nowhere and when silence is not avoidance, but self-respect. Detachment in this context is not weakness, it is wisdom. This shift restores your inner authority. You no longer hand your reality over to someone who distorts it to feel powerful. And in that moment of clarity, you understand a difficult but freeing truth. Not every conflict is meant to be resolved. Some are meant to be recognized, stepped away from, and left behind so your mind can be at peace. Perhaps the most deeply rooted expectation to release is the belief that your love, patience, or endurance will eventually transform her. Many people remain emotionally invested not because they are receiving care, but because they believe that they are investing in a future version of her, one who will finally soften, awaken, and reciprocate. This belief is seductive because it turns suffering into meaning. It allows you to tell yourself that if you just give more, understand more, or stay longer, change will arrive. But psychologically, this expectation rests on a misunderstanding of how narcissism functions. Real change requires inner conflict, humility, and a willingness to confront one's own shadow. As Carl Jung made clear, transformation does not come from being loved harder by others. It comes from an individual's capacity to face what they have been avoiding within themselves. For the narcissistic personality, admiration feels safer than insight, and control feels more stabilizing than growth. Love, in this context, is not a catalyst. It is often interpreted as permission to remain unchanged. If you continue expecting her to change because of what you offer, you slowly begin to betray yourself. You tolerate what violates you. You rationalize what wounds you. You delay your own life in service of a potential that never quite materializes. Over time, hope turns into a quiet form of self-abandonment. Letting go of this expectation is not an act of bitterness, it is an act of maturity. It means accepting that love cannot substitute for self-awareness and sacrifice cannot manufacture character. When you stop trying to be the force that redeems her, you reclaim the energy that has been leaking away from your own becoming. And here is the final truth to sit with. You are not here to be the lesson someone never learns. You are here to live fully. The moment you stop waiting for her to change is the moment your own life is finally free to begin.